there are biases built into our institution. In other words, I'm a doctor in a clinic, right? I have a diabetic patient. I get to spend 7 minutes with them. It's much easier to prescribe metformin and insulin and take a couple lab tests than it is to do an entire program about low carbohydrate diet and switch over their whole eating structure.
Dr. Robert Lufkin was once a self-described product of the medical establishment with a fruitful career as a professor of medicine. He's published hundreds of scientific papers and has received millions of dollars in government funding. But when he was diagnosed with 4 seemingly unrelated chronic diseases and told he'd be on medication for life, he started looking elsewhere for answers.
It was through lifestyle changes that I was able to reverse these very serious and potentially fatal diseases and get off all medications for them.
Lufkin is the author of Lies I Taught in Medical School and the Truth That Can Save Your Life. This is American Thought Leaders, and I'm Jan Jekielek. Dr. Robert Lufkin, such a pleasure to have you on American Thought Leaders.
Jan, it's a pleasure to be here. I'm a fan of your program, and it's so much fun to be here.
It's a real honor to have you, someone who spent years in medical school apparently teaching lies. Tell me about yourself. I mean, you are an incredibly distinguished medical professional. I'd like to kind of let our audience know what you've done.
Sure. I'm a product of the medical establishment. In other words, I'm not a conspiracy theorist, although I acknowledge there are conspiracies out there, and there are perverse financial incentives and other incentives in our industry. But I'm basically a product of mainstream medicine. I've spent my entire career at 2 large medical schools with the academic rank of full professor. I've published hundreds of peer-reviewed scientific papers. My laboratory has received millions of dollars from the federal government and NIH, as well as from drug companies and equipment manufacturers. And so I'm really speaking from the inside of the medical school academic establishment.
But you had an experience that changed you. Tell me about that.
Yeah, well, just a little about my background. I was raised by my parents. My mom was a dietitian, a registered dietitian, so she specialized in nutrition. So growing up, we followed the food pyramid. We religiously avoided saturated fat. We ate low-fat foods. We avoided butter because of the saturated fat, and we substituted margarine with, at the time, trans fats and industrial seed oils. We ate a lot of grains and junk foods, which we thought were healthy at the time. And then fast forward, I went to medical school and then eventually entered a career in academics, where I essentially spent my whole career doing that. And everything went fine until about 10 years ago, I was diagnosed with, out of the blue, with 4 chronic diseases that took me completely by surprise. And I went to specialists to educate myself about these diseases and see how to treat them. And they basically prescribed prescription medicines for each one. And they told me the diseases were more or less unrelated. And the prescription medicines would be necessary to not only treat the symptoms, but also to control the underlying disease. And although they recommended lifestyle changes, they said, sure, it's worth improving your lifestyle, but the reality is you're going to be on these drugs for the rest of your life, and lifestyle, doesn't really work for these things. And it basically was a wake-up call for me. So I got my attention very quickly, and I began talking to other experts. I began doing research and understanding about these diseases, and I eventually began to question the things that they taught me. And I looked closely at some of the breakthroughs that have been made in the last few years in our understanding. It changed the way I thought about these diseases. And I realized that a lot of what was being taught about these diseases and metabolic health in general was incorrect, what I've been teaching and what many of my colleagues are still sadly teaching. And when I implemented a program myself with lifestyle changes, I changed some things very radically, as a matter of fact, with my diet, but also sleep and exercise and stress. When I went back to my doctors, they couldn't believe it. They thought the labs were broken. They wanted me to retest the labs. But long story short, what happened was all my labs returned to normal. The diseases were essentially reversed, and I was off all prescription medicines, and that's where I've been ever since then.
What were the diseases?
One was an arthritis, a type of arthritis called gout, which is due to urate crystal deposition. Another was hypertension. I was in good company. Half of adult Americans have hypertension. The third one was diabetes or prediabetes, type 2 diabetes. My blood sugars were abnormally high. And then the third one was dyslipidemia, which was an abnormality of blood fats. So you think about it, arthritis and hypertension, they're not really related, or blood lipids, blood fat, and arthritis, I don't see the association there. But what I came to understand is that these diseases are all fundamentally driven by the same basic mechanisms. And these mechanisms, unfortunately, there's not prescription medicines for them. What works for these diseases to reverse them is lifestyle changes. But the good news is lifestyle is in our control, and we get to make a decision every single day when we wake up what choices, what we're going to eat, how we're going to exercise, how we're going to live our lives. So it's really empowering that we can take back control of our health doing lifestyle.
But basically, you're saying that you changed your diet and some of your habits, and that's it. And then you went back, and they said these labs can't be right.
That's correct. But out of fairness, my diet, the changes I made in my diet, I was following the standard American diet, the recommended diet, the food pyramid, and I basically turned it upside down. I began doing things like intermittent fasting and fairly aggressive dietary changes, but I've never felt better. I don't consider it a diet now. I consider it the way I live. Being in ketosis, my brain is clearer than it's ever been. I don't want to, eat carbohydrates anymore in the middle of the day or snack all the time. So, but to answer your question, yeah, it was through lifestyle changes that I was able to reverse these very serious and potentially fatal diseases and get off all medications for them. And now I'm not recommending that people, of course, stop these medications without their doctor's approval, because that can be dangerous. I'm not saying just stop everything and try lifestyle. I'm saying begin lifestyle, and you'll find that when you go see your doctor, they'll tell you you don't need the medicines anymore if you have the same success that I had.
Before we continue, we have a sponsor for today's episode. The stock market's been betting on the Fed cutting rates in March, but all three indices got pummeled on news that cuts were off the table. Is this why JP Morgan and UBS are calling for a 23% drop in the S&P? Signs of a recession are everywhere, and inflation is eroding the value of your savings. In times of uncertainty, you can protect your retirement, as I do, and secure your wealth by investing in gold. Call Patriot Gold Group today, mention American Thought Leaders, and you'll always get the best service. Patriot Gold Group was Consumer Affairs' top-rated gold IRA dealer for 7 years in a row. They have a no-fee-for-life IRA, where your IRA or 401k can be in physical gold and silver. Scan this QR code on the screen below or call the toll-free number 888-857-0495 and get a free investor guide today. Again, that's 888-857-0495. Well, I want to touch on this a little bit because I've kind of been, sort of vicariously on this journey with Dr. Paul Merrick. We're here at the FLCCC conference. He's one of the principals here. He started treating COVID in a way that was unorthodox and much more effective. He similarly had this realization that a lot of what he had been taught wasn't entirely right, or in many cases incorrect, and then embarked on a journey looking at diabetes, looking at, now he has this whole cancer monograph, which I find incredibly fascinating. I mean, hundreds of papers of peer-reviewed research showing all sorts of what you would call off-label drugs or vitamins, things like that, profound impacts on reducing the incidence of cancer. I mean, it's astonishing how much research has been done well that we just don't know about.
Yeah, there's a tremendous amount of research being done every day. 7,000 papers are written every day.
Because on this lifestyle stuff that you're talking about, people have researched this. It's not just, someone just saying, oh, I'm going to try,
Yeah, and there are peer-reviewed, prospective, controlled studies where, for example, with diabetes, where people can reverse type 2 diabetes with dietary interventions to the point that they go off insulin and they go off all drugs, and the results are out there. But I think the medical system is it's a large institution. There are a lot of institutional drives and factors. I mean, if you look at diabetes and you go to a hospital